So Donna, are you ready to start?
I am. Thank
you. So welcome everyone. Welcome to this call, Music and Numbers. I have very good memories of the last call. That's around a month ago, I guess. And so Music and Numbers, this is part one of potentially a second, I think. So
or maybe three.
Maybe three. Well, we're ready.
Maybe.
And
it's a big topic. It just gets bigger and bigger.
You keep creating along the way, and we will
yes,
we'll hear from you when we're ready to join. So hi everyone, my name is Julie Arts. I'm based in Belgium, and I'm hosting today's session, which is just actually giving the floor to Donna for her amazing work around music and numbers. And we're also expecting a guest later, Kevin, who is still asleep as it is the middle of the night where he is, but he will get up in the middle of the night and join us and offer his creation. But Donna, over to you, for music and numbers.
Thank you, Julie. And of course, thank you to Julie for helping out with the slides today. And of course, Eleanor and Maureen Doolin for continuing to invite me to do these. Jenny Hansen, who's on screen. Jenny is the person, actually, this lovely friend who put me in contact with the PARI Center. So I'm very, very grateful to her. And I must point out my beloved friend, Sandra Beard. So she's here again. It's 4 o'clock in the morning in Melbourne. And there she is, looking as beautiful as ever. So wonderful. And then my friend, Kevin March is going to join us. He's a composer, and I'll be telling you a little bit more about our collaboration a little bit later on. But now let's get stuck into the we'll get into the slides, because I'm not going to claim to be an expert in a lot of this stuff having to do with the like Kabbalah, for example. I know all of that stuff is very esoteric sort of knowledge, that's the kind of thing that people will spend their entire lives devoted to. And I would say I'm more peripherally connected with these studies, these Hermetic studies, although in a way music in itself, by its very nature, is esoteric and shall we say Hermetic knowledge. Anyway, so here's our title page, and as always I dedicate to my beloved Niccolò. As I said, per sempre la mia ispirazione, he is always my inspiration. So the next slide is, I just also like to pay homage to the ancestral owners of the land on which I live. It's situated in the heart of the deep indigenous history of native New Mexico, and was inhabited hundreds and thousands of years ago by ancient Paleo Indians, later by the Keras and Tenoan speaking peoples, and then later on in 15th, 16th centuries, 17th centuries, they were raided by the Comanches, who were among the very fiercest of what were called the Horse Indians. So continuing on to the next slide. I just also need to pay homage to my beautiful piano, which my dance partner, and this piano, actually I got the date wrong. It was actually 1915. However, this piano was completely restored by the marvelous people Albuquerque Piano Works, and I have the most amazing piano technician. I literally could not do any of this without him. He comes here and spends hours working on it, just making sure that it's always in top condition. So that's my friend Douglas and Neil and Anthony at Piano Works. I also want to pay homage today to a very special friend who left his earthly life just about a week ago. This was Aurelio de la Vega, Cuban emigre. He actually fled Cuba in 1959 at the time of the revolution, eventually settled in Southern California. And I became acquainted with him when I was creating my the Don't Touch Me CD, which is the 37 Danzas Cubanas by Ignacio Cervantes. I was keen to track down manuscripts, and I was led to Aurelio, who became a very dear friend. And in fact, the reason I've put this particular album cover here is because I have recorded on this CD one of his very beautiful pieces called the Danza Lenta. And you don't need to buy the whole CD. You can go online, you can stream it, just that track if you're interested, but of course all the rest of the music you might enjoy as well. There's a bit of Bach on there, some Chopin, a few Cervantes, and also a number of rags by some of my American composer friends, William Bolcom, William Albright, and others. So yes, Veil Aurelio. And let's continue on to the next slide. So now we get into the whole notion of quintessence, which is what I decided I wanted to name the series. Because when I gave my first webinar, I think it was back in September, and I think it was maybe after the second one, we started talking about creating a series. And I thought the quintessence of music really sums up my experience of it. There is certainly highly concentrated essence for me of a very powerful experience when I'm studying, concentrating, and certainly when I'm performing. But in particular, with regard to the numbers here, it's considered to be, and this is again coming from medieval philosophy, it was surmised that in addition to the more obvious elements that are observable, earth, air, fire, water, that there was another element, the fifth element, which is the element in which the heavenly bodies were circulating. And anyway, so let's continue on to the next slide. Now, I think before we talk about, I mean, obviously this could go on and on. This is why I say there's going to be 2 or 3, or who knows how many of these music and numbers sessions, because there's so many avenues in which we can explore this this notion. But just getting back to the number 4, which it's this something kind of fundamental about 4. We have, the human beings have decided to settle upon the notion of 4 principal directions, so north, east, south, west, and then the aforementioned 4 elements. Then if we start moving into the more mystical realms, and I will admit that I am a long time student and contemplator of the tarot, and in the tarot there are 4 suits. They actually correspond to the modern deck of playing cards, except that we have an additional set of what's called the dare I use the word trumps, represent 22 additional, but never mind. These 4 human aspects, mind, spirit, body, emotion, are represented by the 4 suits, which are in order: mind represented by the swords, spirit by the wands, body by the pentacles, and emotion by the cups. Then we come to another very important aspect of interpreting the tarot. The tarot has its roots in the Kabbalah, which then has its roots also in this notion of the tetragrammaton. And these letters, Yod, He, Va, He, these represent, and in fact, if you actually just kind of say it, Yod, He, Va, it kind of comes out in the way that often the unspeakable name of God in the Judaic tradition comes off sounding rather like Jehovah. And I guess this was sort of the way that this name could be uttered without actually using the actual letters appearing here. Again, I'm not going to go into huge discussion about this, and certainly people may have a lot to say about this in discussion. However, I want to talk about the notion of then the way the scale that is the building block of Western European art music, which is most of what we have talked about so far. And tetra meaning four. So if we talk about, and I know I've talked about this before, so if you've been in previous webinars, this won't be mysterious. So this is what we call the diatonic scale. There are 7 different pitches in the diatonic scale. But if we, because we end 1 octave higher than the note on which we started, so there's actually 8. But what we have is very interesting arrangement then within this so-called octave or 8 pitches. We have 2 groups of 4 that are identical in terms of their interval composition. So the first tetrachord is this, and if I literally transpose or move that set of intervals, which again I'll talk about these at greater length in a short while, but we have what's called a major second followed by another major second followed by a minor second. I join the 2 tetrachords through a major second, and once again I go major, major, minor. So I just literally have identical that are connected at the midpoint by a major second. While I'm talking about this, though, let me point out that we have another interval that I'm going to talk about at greater length. That's the interval that divides the scale exactly in half. And that is the note that falls right between that major second, the F sharp in this case. And this is an interval called the tritone, or it was known as the diabolus in musica, the devil in music, because this was considered to be a forbidden interval. Certainly is not forbidden at all in the 20th century. Again, we'll talk about that. So then moving on to the number 5, again, we talked a little bit about the ether, and as I said, so much that could be discoursed upon. I've given some reading material. There's all kinds of options for learning more about ether. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy for me is one of the most brilliant places to go to look for beautifully written scholarly articles about ether and people that were philosophizing and theorizing about ether, Francis Bacon, and other philosophers. So if you go, when you get the film, you'll have the reading material. I think maybe you got it too as part of the package of inviting you. But I want to also talk, going back to the very first webinar when I talked about the dot on the line. Remember that one? The dot on the line? Well, initially, when music started to be written down, there was a single line for the staff. And then eventually we needed more. But what I find interesting is the fact that the modern staff, let me just go to a blank page here, is 5 lines. Now, why it was decided that 5, I don't know who decided it was going to be 5 lines, not 6, 4, 3. It's going to be 5 lines. So, and of course, then what we call the grand staff Okay, hold on, I need this. The grand staff, which you can see, is the combination of the top and the bottom. Generally, again, Western European art music is generally going to have two 5-line staves combined through that bracket at the left-hand edge. And this is what we call the grand staff. But, you know, that doesn't stop people like Ruth Crawford, for example, from deciding she needs more space in which to present her ideas. So here we have a grand staff that actually consists of 3 5-line staves, okay? And again, you notice this goes back again to our notation: treble clef, bass clef. Generally, treble refers to this upper region of the instrument bass down to below. And again, we're going to hear some Ruth Crawford a bit later on. Okay, now let me get back organized here so I don't mess up. Now, getting back to this, what I was talking about with the scale, okay, we talked about the way that the scale is created from the 2 linked tetrachords. Well, what's interesting is that the second tetrachord, okay, well, let's do this. Again, pure numbers. So if I just take this diatonic scale and I assign a number to each one of the pitches, then I'm going to start obviously with numero uno, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then because this is the repetition of the original pitch, and again, here's another number feature, which again, I'm going to need a lot more time to talk about all of that stuff with Pythagoras and tuning and all of that. And I may invite my piano tuner, Douglas, to be part of a session in which he would elaborate on all of these factors. So once again, stay tuned. But here we go. The 5th degree of the scale is very, very important degree of the scale. Because, and again, I'll jump ahead here a little bit. In Western European art music, the 5th degree of the scale became, and I'll explain my theory how this happened. But just for now, just be aware that this 5th degree of the scale has a very, very important property in terms of its impact upon structure through its functioning harmonic role. Because, for example, if I play this chord, which we know, I'll tell you that this is what we call the tonic or key, and sometimes is referred to the home key. If I move to the 5th degree of the scale, there's this sense of having a pull or a sort of tension that's saying, I need to go somewhere. And where you feel, and again, this is all of us that were raised in the Western European art music tradition, you know, again, very much a cultural phenomenon, I believe, because you go to Asia and, you know, it doesn't work the same way. But here, this feels really like it needs to go back to there. And this is what we call the dominant tension, which in my opinion is the one of the ruling forces in Western European art music. And when you think of 5, it's called the dominant. I mean, even the name, the terminology, because dominant, the sort of domineering or demanding resolution, as it were. So anyway, again, I'll come back to that in a bit, but let me now show you. I want to now introduce to you just an example of what we call the Gregorian Chant. And again, this is a very big, long topic for discussion. The point of introducing this here, because we're talking, 7th, 8th century Christian era. The early Christians obviously adapted. The early Christians were converted Jews. And of course, then they brought with them their musical tradition, which was the cantillation of the Psalms. So there was this tradition already of intoning the written word. And this again was then sort of taken over by the early Christian church and codified by Pope Gregory into what we know now as the Gregorian Chant. I'm just going to play this. Again, those of you that were raised in the Catholic tradition are very familiar with the Mass and the 7-part Mass, which begins with the Kyrie eleison, and this is the Kyrie concipotens. And I'm not going to play the repeats because you're supposed to play each one of them 3 times, each Kyrie 3 times, each Christe 3 times, and then 3 more Kyries. So here we have. Probably as much as I need to play for you to demonstrate what I want to show you. But I will point out the repetition of tones here, which is an important aspect also of what we call the common practice period approach to harmony and even melody based upon the diatonic scale, which gives us 7 different pitches. Primarily, the primary set of pitches is the 7 pitches of the diatonic scale. Of course, composers, used other pitches in the scale, but the main pitch material is the 7 pitches of the diatonic scale, and they would use repetition of pitch as a means of establishing this tonality. Now, even though this is an example of what we would call monody, meaning mono, 1 single line, and again, this is the early chant, which is the monks. They're all singing in unison together, and so I'm just pointing out that we have this pitch is repeated in the first 4 pitches. We have 3 repetitions. Here it is again, the A natural, and here it is again. Here it is again, here. Now what we can hear is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There's this 5 relationship here. In fact, if we consider that our first pitch in this particular scale is the D, that makes the A natural the 5th degree of the scale, which is the pitch that is, it's the most heard within this phrase. Now, the thing that was interesting, and I don't know what really happened here. I wish I could time travel and go back and been, say, at one of the monasteries where the monks were singing and chanting. At some point, some of the monks, and possibly because their voices were not as low or as high, would drop, actually, because their voices were lower, they would actually drop down a perfect 4th. And so hence we add another dimension to the monody. It's still in a sense monody, but we have now a completely different color because we've added this interval below. monks would double that lower pitch an octave higher, and then we would end up with this. So we have the, I'm doing something wrong here. Perfect fourth below, and again, I'll talk about the intervals and how they flip over, because the interval of a perfect fourth inverts to a perfect fifth. And so then we end up with this. Sorry. I'm not doing a very good job at playing this, sorry. In any case, getting back to the idea of the five then. So we have the original pitch, and we have the perfect fifth above, the perfect fourth below. It's surrounded by, literally by the fives. Now let's move on to the next slide, because I'm getting stuck here. Yes, the tetragrammaton. We're going to have to talk about that another time. But again, this is the four, the notion of the four, the universal principle. Again, you know, it's possible that some of you are much more familiar with the teachings of the Kabbalah than I am. But point being that each one of these letters then has also very powerful properties and is considered to be this tetragrammaton, and this represents the universal principle, as I said, which contemplates the esoteric relationship between the eternal God and his mortal creations. Big stuff, but again, this is really the foundation, and for the tarot, which is, in a way, you could call it maybe a bit more of a sort of common person's association with all of this. Anyway, let's keep on going. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, and this is just Aristotle talking about the ether. Something else beyond earth, fire, air, and this probably is out of order. They gave the highest place a name of its own. And again, if you want to think about the ether is the place in which the also the god, and then of course in Greek mythology, the gods, you know, so we have this sort of notion that there is this other realm in which the higher powers, or the god or the gods are situated. Let's keep on going. Next slide. They need to. Oh yeah, now this is another one. I'm going to let you look at this on your own, because we'll talk about this another time. I've got to keep moving here because I'm going to run out of time. About, you know, and again, this, you can look at this at your leisure. I just thought was worth showing the symbology, because again, the Hebrew alphabet, the Egyptian alphabet, the Greek alphabet, you know, these early alphabets, very interesting to study resemblances between them. Let's keep going. Yeah, the Greek numbers, which again, you might even notice between this one and the next one, the next slide. You know, we have sort of similar names: Alpha, Beta, Aleph, Beth, Gimel, Gamma. So there's very strong connections between the Greek and the Hebrew alphabet and numbering system. Let's keep going. Next one. So now let's talk about Pythagoras. Pythagoras, interesting guy. Apparently he never wrote anything down. So all we know about Pythagoras comes down to us through students or other people that then studied or found out about him later on. But what's really so important about Pythagoras if in fact all the reports are true. He is the person that created, or at least came up with, the theory of the harmonic series. Well, it's not even a theory. This is a real thing. Let's go to the next slide, because I'm pretty sure the next slide shows the, yeah. So what I want to show you now, this is a very interesting feature of, and then going back to the idea of mono. So here we have a mono chord, which is, in this case, I'm going to use the pitch C, which in the grand piano is a single string. So it is technically a mono chord. This C, I'm going to depress this silently. Well, this is what it sounds like if I play it. So that's the pitch, the low pitch C. But if I depress that silently so that the string can vibrate because it's no longer dampened. Looking at this harmonic series, and for those of you that read music or have any familiarity with music, what you're going to notice is that I'm moving up the keyboard, and I'm just going to play. This is what's called the first partial, or the first overtone, and this is the octave, which means that it is vibrating at twice the speed of this C. And I'm not sure if you can hear. Can you hear it? I don't know if this microphone is picking it up. Yeah, okay, thank you. I see a thumbs up there. So, oh my gosh, that was not good. So what's happened is that this string is now vibrating at half of its length, because this string, this vibration is interacting with the original string's length at half. And now the next pitch that I come to is this one, which is the perfect fifth. So this, again, the importance of 5, because the first pitch that is no longer the doubling or tripling of the vibration of the fundamental is this one, which is vibrating at a ratio of 3 to 2. So once again, if you want to think about it, it's like the string is now vibrating in thirds. Then I go back to the C again, which is now 3 times faster than the fundamental. And then from there, I further subdivide. Now the intervals start getting closer. So first interval is big one, octave, then perfect fifth, perfect fourth, which is, I mentioned before, the intervals, which again, I'll talk about them in a sec, they invert. So if this is my octave and the perfect fifth is here, when I flip that interval over to get back to the C, it turns into a perfect fourth. And just be aware that all of the intervals, when you invert them, the numbers will add up to 9. Always add up to 9. So I'll just explain now. So here we have seconds, thirds, fourths, fifths, sixths, sevenths, and then 8 or octave, which is then the inversion of the unison, which is 1. So that equals 9. So we have a second, which if I flip that over, I move the C up, that becomes a seventh. 7 plus 2 is 9. If I invert the third, put the C up above instead of below, that's a sixth. And so 6 plus 3 is 9. And then I have the perfect fourth, which I've described already, inverts to the fifth, 4 plus 5. And then I have the fifth inverting to the fourth. So then the sixth, which again inverts back to the third, and the seventh, which inverts back to the second. Then there's that funky tritone in the middle. Well, we could think of this as 4.5, because this technically is known as an augmented fourth or a diminished fifth. So if I augment the 4, call it 4.5, 4.5 plus 4.5 is 9. So that's just in a nutshell. So here I have octave, 5th, 4th, 3rd, 3rd, 3rd. Now I go to the seconds. Then my seconds get smaller. Now this becomes a minor second. They get bunched together as we go up. And what's interesting is that when we reach this point, we can start to hear how a scale can be crafted, because we need intervals of seconds in order to create the scale. Now what I'm missing here is an A natural, but if I go, there I have a G scale with a minor third. Again, this is technical, but don't worry about it. It's main thing is that you can hear, for example, if you look on the slide, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Say even from the 7th pitch, the one that's in blue, if you go from there, you can see that all the intervals now are tighter. They're closer together. There's line space, line space, line space, line space. Okay, do you see that? And that means that those are seconds. Those are intervals of some version of a second. And that's all right. So this is how the harmonic series, I mean, again, this is very rudimentary and very quick way of illustrating some fundamental aspects of, where's my clock, of the way that diatonic music is organized. So let me just put this together for you here with, by playing something for you. I always like to play some Bach. It kind of cleanses the ears a little bit after all of this discussion about all of these tight intervals. What we hear in this beautiful first prelude from the Well-Tempered Clavier, 1722, is essentially a chord progression. And again, this illustrates very beautifully the harmonic tradition that became codified and then is known, it was named by theorists in the 20th century, the common practice period. This is the period in which the tonic, dominant, tonic meaning home key, as I explained before, dominant, how that plays out as a generator of musical form. So here I have tonic. I'll just play the progression. So what we hear is tonic, and then we actually move to what we call a predominant. Again, too technical, but here's the dominant. And you can hear how both of these pitches are yearning to resolve. So this is very, and then we have a series of, here's another 5-1 relationship. Here's another one. This is dominant functioning again. Too technical, but what we've done here is we've substituted the A flat for the G natural. Again, essentially a dominant functioning chord. Dominant to tonic, keynote, another dominant to tonic relationship. Again, now here we have at the end of the piece a very interesting feature that crops up in some Western European art music, what we call the dominant pedal, which is now, I'm just going to be laying on that G while the chords on the top or the pitches on the top are going to change. Again, this creates a lot of what we call tension, feeling like there's got to be a resolution, and this dominant tension will most often feature at the end of the piece, which indeed it does. So here we have. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6, 7, 8 bars with that G in the bass. And finally, we come back to the tonic, although in this case, again, he does this fancy thing. Again, too technical, but he does the 5 of 4. He takes us to the subdominant before. Anyway, never mind. I'm going to play it for you now, because the other thing I want to point out is that we have this very interesting tension also between these two pitches, the C, which is the keynote, and the pitch B, which is the 3rd degree of the 5. And you're going to hear a lot of this throughout this piece. So let me just point out that we have now the C. The other thing I want to just point out also is you're going to just hear the repetition of pitch and constant returning to this home key of C in some way, or the pitch C as a way of returning home. So we go away from home, exploring, conquering, whatever, coming back home. And so here, and what Bach has done is taken that chord progression and he's actually opened up the chords, the verticality of the chords, and he's actually opened it up and turned them into these beautiful. And I played this another time, but let me play it for you now. Here's the B. Back to the C. C is still in the bass. C and the B here. We would even call this a temporary modulation, because now we come back. Now we're in G. The B and the C. So Bach, in a way, is one of the first composers, because he was working in a different arena, shall we say. Prior to Bach, music tended to be modal rather than diatonic. But again, that's the topic for yet another conversation. Let's move on to the next slide. So the notion of consonant versus dissonant intervals, because now we're going to move on to something completely different. Certain intervals were considered consonant, and still are. The unison, which is if I have two people singing this pitch, that's considered a unison. That is a perfect interval. And then its counterpart, the octave, is is a perfect interval. The second most perfect interval is the fifth, as we've described. And then, in a way, the third most perfect interval is its inversion, the fourth. Now, throughout history, the other intervals have been considered to varying degrees dissonant. Even the third, which we now think of as a perfectly consonant interval, consonant meaning, shall we say, pleasing to the ear. But in the Middle Ages, the third was actually not considered to be a consonant. It was fourths and fifths were the preferred intervals. So we had, but then we added thirds and sixths. The second has tended to always be considered more dissonant because it's very close together. And then, of course, its inversion, the seventh, also. And again, we hear in this interval this sense that it needs to move somewhere. This dissonance creates a sort of tension that begs for resolution. And so this is, again, this tension between the dominant and the tonic is also partly a factor of these intervals at work. So moving into then the notion of dissonant intervals, I want to introduce now to you the music of a very, very wonderful American composer, Ruth Crawford. She was born in East Liverpool, Ohio in 1901. She had a tragically short life, died at the age of 52 in 1953. But she was, in my opinion, one of the truly great composers of the 20th century, well, any century. As we moved from the late 19th century into the 20th century, composers were increasingly facing what they considered to be a crisis, which was that the diatonic system they felt had been enriched to the point with chromaticism, to the point that it could not go any further. And some composers, Arnold Schoenberg in particular, 1908, he so-called abandoned tonality. We'll talk about him another time. For today, I want to talk about Ruth Crawford because Ruth, in my opinion, did not abandon tonality, but she significantly enriched it by using a lot of pitches that are not in the diatonic key structure. However, she still creates a sense of home through, even though she's doing her best to avoid repeating pitches, she still ends up repeating pitches. And two pitches that she repeats right here at the beginning, the C and the B. How interesting that we have that connection also to the Bach. We have, and again, she's using a lot of dissonant intervals. And because she is also avoiding the repetition of pitch until, again, this is kind of I don't even want to call it a system, but it was sort of a philosophy of non-repetition of tones until at least 7 other pitches had sounded. And actually they would strive to go even further, 9, 11 pitches different before repeating. Again, this as a way of avoiding a sense of tonality through repetition of pitch or continuously coming back to the same chord, the way Bach does. So he starts here and he comes back to here. Within 3 bars, he's already back home. Ruth is she's using, again, the 7th and the 6th, which is, again, not as dissonant, but another 7th, another 7th, another 7th. Perfect 5th consonant, she 7th and 7th. So here's our ethereal, literally, this is for me the ether. Sorry, I'll just probably just play this for you. This is from her Preludes for Piano number 6. This was composed in wait a minute. No, let me tell you, let me get this date correct. 1922, I believe, is when she finished composing this one. And so again, we're talking early decades of the 20th century. So she does create unity through repetition of this idea, which she does vary slightly. So she's not always using the exact same pitches. And she does have, oh, I have written this out, how many different pitches. She definitely has about 7 different pitches within that little idea there. But she also creates unity through her harmony. And even though I would imagine that not very many of you would hear this piece as being in C, however, I hear the C at the start and I hear the C in the bass because, again, she ends on the same pitches that she starts, except that instead of being up in the nether region, she's right down in the underworld. And so we have this, and if C is our, shall we say, home pitch or tonic pitch, here we have the famous tritone interval, but the F sharp being, again, the half step or leading tone to the dominant, which then shows up, and let me play this for you again. So we have the F sharp to G, so there's that relationship which mirrors this relationship. The C and the B is mirrored by the the G and the F sharp. So it's the same interval, it's just moved up a perfect fifth. So we have again that perfect fifth relationship I've been talking about, and it functions between both the C and the B, because we have the B goes to the F sharp and C goes to the G. So here, let me just play this for you. Also, she has this. So she does it here in this middle register, but then she moves to she changes the interval structure. She goes G to F sharp. So she takes that, and again, she inverts it. So then I have this, F sharp to G, F sharp to G, then I move the G to the F sharp, etc. And we have, she also then uses the B prominently at the climax. And I also want to mention here, again, Kevin, when he comes into the meeting, he's going to talk more, and we're going to give you a very grand tour of how the Fibonacci series can play a role in musical structure. And in fact, and some of you, can we, I think the Fibonacci might be the next slide. Can we move? Oh, then we'll have to talk about that another time. Circle of fifths, nah. Okay, that's repertoire. Let's keep going. I think maybe next is, yeah. So the Fibonacci series, and again, we have a Pisan, Italian mathematician born in Pisa, Filius Bonacci, and so-called Fibonacci. And so the series of, and probably many of you are familiar with this. If you add 1 plus 1, you get 2. 2 plus 1 equals 3. 3 plus 2 equals 5. And as you go up in the Fibonacci series, you can divide any of the larger numbers into its next smaller number, and you are going to get what we call the golden ratio, which is approximately 0.615. And as you will notice, if you start doing the divisions, you're going to notice that every one of these divisions is going to give you a slightly different version of the 0.615. But point being that it's not quite 2/3 of the way through. And what is really amazing in this piece by Crawford is that her second big climax of the piece, which is in the second half of the piece, arrives at almost precisely what I have identified as the golden section. That is when we have this, we move up here. He's right here, which definitely feels like a kind of arrival. And once again, she's on the C natural here in the bass. Obviously, when composers abandon the traditional sense of 5/1 polarity and as the means of creating tension, the sense of tension released in the musical structure, they're using other means, and certainly rhythm subdivisions of the basic unit of pulse is an important way that composers will create this sense of tension. They will tend to speed up the action. And again, you notice that, and I'll just give you an example based right from where I was. The second half starts again with our beautiful ethereal intervals up here in the heavens. The planets are spinning around. And then here, even this element here adds a bit of interest. It's a bit faster moving, but again, she uses the same idea rhythmically to create unity. Now, here we get more active and louder and more. Also, if you want to call it the harmonic rhythm, in other words, the way that she's changing more frequently than she had been in the bass register. And let me just play that for you again so that you hear how that. unfolds. So stasis, these aromas rising up and rising up out of the bass as well. Of closure also then by slowing down the action. And here she's now taken the ideas, the ethereal wafting up of, I call it aromas, perfume. She moves it down. And again, just by repeating over and over the same idea here. She doesn't change in any way this time. Again, creating a sense of perhaps denouement. It's, you know, she's kind of winding it out. Again, this very, very general look at a very amazing piece of music, but I do want to play at least one more piece that is written in this tradition. Let's move ahead to the next slide so I can see what else. Now, let's not do the slides for now. We can take the slides off for a moment. So we'll get back to the slides. So now what I want to do is I would like to introduce to you the music of another very important composer of the 20th century, whose name is probably not very familiar to you. This is Carl Sprague Ruggles. And Carl Sprague Ruggles was a very close friend of my main hero, composer Charles Ives. And, you know, we'll hear more about Charles Ives as these webinars proceed. I did play, last time I played the Alcott's movement from the very beautiful Concord Sonata. This is a set of pieces that Ruggles wrote in 1940s called Evocations. And I'm going to start with the first one. I don't know if I'll have time to do both of these. He's using similar processes here. The so-called dissonation or avoidance of tonality by non-repetition of tones. And in fact, I would say that he is more deliberately pushing the edges of the so-called non-tonality or pan-tonality, perhaps even than Ruth was. However, I think we will hear that there are similar processes at work by which he does create a sense of home key. But once again, we're going to look at the way that Ruggles not only uses pitch material, so these dissonant intervals. So he starts off with a perfect fifth, but then loves the tritone. And again, tritone, tritone. And lots of tritones will, again, just kind of mix that up, because when you subdivide the scale equally into two, you don't know which way you're going. You know, you could go up or down and it's all the same. It's when you move to the G that suddenly there feels like this something maybe is, that there's some potential for something to happen. But this, again, it's like the twos in the tarot. There's this duality. It's kind of like a bit stable because it's just a perfect duality, perfect subdivision. Now, Ruggles, here, let me just point out to you the way he uses the 12 pitches of the chromatic scale. Okay, so when I reduce the scale down to only minor seconds, which is the smallest interval we can get on the keyboard. And again, Ruth was working with this chromatic scale as well, but I'm going to give you a little bit more precise indication of how he uses these 12 pitches. This is again, I just go, these are all different pitches. And so in the first 2 bars, we have 8 different pitches. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the 9th sounding pitch is actually a repetition of the opening pitch. So even there creates maybe a slight sense of closure. Then we move to, again, a repetition of a pitch we've already heard. Then we have 2 pitches we've already heard. Then we have 9, 10 pitches we've already heard, 11, 12. So in the first 4 bars of the piece, we have all 12 pitches of the chromatic scale out of a total of how many pitches are we hearing here? Something like maybe 15, 16 pitches, 12 are different. So again, he's pretty much not letting us feel too comfortable. And also observe the way he uses rhythm, again, to create this sense of increasing excitement. So starts off with this idea, which he develops slightly faster here. And then it gets even faster here. All right, so let me just see if there's anything else I want to tell you about it before I play it. Again, I want to tell you where the golden ratio is. Oh, this is pretty exciting. Well, you know what? I reckon you're gonna get it. It's so obvious. And I was stunned when I did the math and I realized that it happens, that it's exactly at the place you would almost go, oh yeah, that's gotta be it. And sure enough, it is. It's kind of in 3 sections, this piece. The first part introducing the basic rhythmic ideas. It then develops and gets more excited, again, rhythmically more vibrant and moving at a much quicker pace in the middle of the piece. Then we also have these marvelous shapes. Also is another way that the composers create this sense of dramatic arc, shall we say, is through tessitura, because we have this middle section, which is etc. He reaches this big high point, but then he comes crashing down, and then we have what I call a coda, which again is a bit similar to what Ruth did when she got to this place where she's just repeating this kind of like it almost dissolves as a way of creating closure. It just rather fades away. So this is evocation number 1 by Carl Ruggles, and I really would love to play number 2 for you as well. So I'll play this, and I think we have time for number 2, but we'll do this one first. And oh yes, I also wanted to point out that once again we have this shall we say, dynamic tension between the first pitch of the piece, the C sharp, and the last pitch of the piece, which is a D natural. And once again, if I reduce that down to its tightest interval relationship, it's a minor second, same as the C to B that we heard in Bach and in Ruth. And so here we have it, C sharp to D, and then interestingly enough, he starts the second of the evocations on the pitch D, and again sets up a half step minor second relationship at the start there, which he plays out once again at the end of the piece. The last 2 pitches of the piece are D and E flat. And again, I think that after you've heard music like this, your ear, as Ives would say, stretches your ears. You become more familiar with this language, and it does not sound so strange. And you also kind of can almost, I would say, you feel the way the trajectory of the music builds to the sort of highest point of tension which is not necessarily the dominant key, or the dominant chord, but it is, shall we say, dominant functioning in the sense that it creates this sense of expectation that something has to happen, something big, or there's going to be a big change taking place. Evocation number 1 from 4 Chants for Piano by Carl Ruggles. And we do have just enough time before Kevin comes on screen. I really want to play the second one. It's dedicated to John Kirkpatrick, who was also a friend of Charles Ives's and of Ruggles, and also a friend of mine, sadly long departed from his earthly life. John was the first person to give the complete performance of the Concord Sonata in 1939. This piece, I think you'll hear, is even more. He's got all 12 pitches in the first 2 bars, and he doesn't repeat a single one. We could almost call it a 12-tone row, and I will talk about that at much greater length in the next webinar, Music and Numbers 2. You're going to get a lot of discussion about how that system came to be and how it functions. But this, all 12 pitches, which he then repeats 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Again, the next 2 bars, again, all 12 pitches, but not in exactly the same order. We also have a canon in which this idea is presented in canon. Here it is. Which is again a very Bach contrapuntal device. And again, this is a slightly longer composition, but again, using these same ideas we've talked about, the rushing to the high point of excitement. The golden ratio does not necessarily occur at quite the place you would expect it. Oh, in case you were wondering, the golden ratio is right here. When I land here, that's the 6.615. So again, here just to finish up this part of the session, the second of the evocations by Carl Sprague Ruggles. There are two more of these. Maybe one day I will get to play all of them for you. All right, so I really need to take a 30-second break. So when I come back, I will introduce you to Kevin.
Well, maybe we can all have a 30-second break then, a quick stretch, a glass of water, and then we'll continue when Donna is back. Okay. Donna,
So,
shall
hello.
I bring Kevin in right now? Is that what you would like? Did I bring Kevin in as on the screen?
Give me 1 second here. So, I want to tell you a little bit about Kevin before I introduce him. So, Kevin and I actually, we went to the same school. I did my master's degree at University of Michigan, and William Balcom was a very close mentor. He wasn't officially my teacher, but he was certainly close to the circle of composers that I was hanging around with, and got to know him very well, and his wife Joan, also William Albright. So some years later, I'm in Australia, and I find I'm contacted by this young man named Kevin March. Turns out that he has come to live in Australia, and he studied at the University of Michigan with William Balcom and William Albright. So we had that that in common. Turns out that we also have in common a great fascination with Edward Gorey. And for those of you that are not familiar with this amazing author illustrator, he's quite an interesting character, and he's created, in addition to a number of books that tend to be slightly on the macabre side, with the drawings, and I should have brought the books down, but turns out that he's created, again, this is me with the tarot, turns out that he has created also a set of cards that he calls the Fantod pack. And also turns out that Kevin and me both are fascinated by this guy, and we love the Fantod pack. And so for years we'd been talking about collaborating on a project in which he would write some music for me that I would then prepare and perform. And so in 2020, when I had a real birthday on the 29th of February, and I was able to be with all of my pals in Australia, we gave the world premiere of 2 of the pieces that he created for the set, the Waltzing Mouse, and hang on, I should have gotten these out ahead of time. The Yellow Bird, where's the Yellow Bird? Oh, where are you? Hang on, my yellow bird is missing. And in any case, so since then, he's created several more pieces, and the one that we're going to talk about today, because when I was talking with him about this webinar and about numbers and the Fibonacci series, he says, well, you know, the stones, I've actually used Fibonacci processes to create my phrases and pitch selection for the stones. So now, Kevin, where are you?
Okay, I'll bring Kevin in, and just as to let you know where we are, we have around half an hour more.
Yes, that's fine.
Kevin, are you with us?
Kevin. Yeah, and let me say that Kevin has gotten up at 5 o'clock in the morning in Australia to be part of this session.
And he was on camera a little bit before. Maybe, Kevin, can you hear us?
Mm-hmm. Kevin. I don't know where he went. All right, in any case, let me get my...
Kevin?
Where are you? Let's see.
So he's definitely part of the call, but for now his video is off, and it was on the whole time.
Oh, it's his video's off. Maybe he went off on the break thinking it was going to be longer. Let's see. No.
Impossible. Kevin, can you hear us?
Hello, everyone.
Oh, there you are.
There you are.
Hello, Kevin. So, Kevin,
How are you
I've
this
given
morning?
you a little bit of an introduction. So, well, you probably heard what I've said. So, yeah, so now it's over to you.
Good morning, everyone. As Donna introduced me, I'm Kevin March. I am speaking to you this morning from Melbourne, Australia. And just in case the lighting here in the room seems a little odd, that's because it is 5:28 in the morning and the sun has not yet come up. So I'm speaking to you from dark Melbourne this morning. Before I get into the talk, I want to recognize the fact that the lands on which the city of Melbourne sit and the land on which I reside and from which I am speaking to you is the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I wish to pay my respects this morning to these traditional owners of the land and to their leaders past, present, and emerging. It's important for us to recognize that these lands were never ceded by the traditional owners, and that even to this day, as they have always been and always will continue to be, they are Aboriginal lands. Okay, so as you may have surmised by now, I am the composer of The Stones, which you will hear in a little while. And Donna's asked me to talk to you a little bit today about what governs the underlying structures of the piece. So as you have probably surmised from Donna's fascinating talk, we composers are always looking for interesting ways to create structure, to establish relationships between the different elements of a piece. And it's this structure and it's these elements that tend to create meaning in a piece. So you're undoubtedly familiar with a lot of these structures. Donna's spoken to you a bit about dissonation. She's spoken to you a bit about pitch organization. You are probably very familiar, of course, with church modes, for example, from the Renaissance, and the major and minor scales that were prominent in the 18th and 19th century. These are all systems of pitch organization. In the late 19th century and early 20th century, especially in musical styles like French Impressionism, we started hearing things like the whole tone and pentatonic scales. Interesting thing happened in the 20th century. Composers began to construct their own scales that were neither modal nor major or minor or whole tone or scales that didn't fit any of these other definitions. We call them synthetic scales. The Stones is in a sense constructed out of a synthetic scale, and I'll show you how I came up with that scale in just a bit. Of course, you can't talk about pitch structures and organization without at least mentioning and giving a nod to the 12-tone system, which is one of the predominant systems of pitch organization in the 20th century. Now, the system of pitch organization that I used in the Stones was derived from Fibonacci numbers. And Donna's already introduced you to the idea of the Fibonacci number and the golden mean. But just to give you a little bit more background so that you can see how I have used these pitches to create this piece of music. Now, if I'm allowed to do this, I would like to do a screen share so that I can share some slides. So I'm not sure who to ask this of, but whoever it is that would give me permission to do a screen share,
That'll be
if I may
Julie.
do that.
Hi, Kevin, you should be allowed.
There we go.
There you go.
Thank you.
And if you just give me a moment here to organize myself. Okay, so just to give you a quick rundown of what the Fibonacci numbers are, where they come from, as they relate to my particular piece of music. As Donna said, Fibonacci numbers come from something that we call the golden ratio. The golden ratio is a mathematical relationship in which the ratio of one value to another is the same as the ratio of the sum of both values to the larger. So here you can see this in this first slide right there in the middle in blue, red, and green. You can see this expressed geometrically. So the ratio of this short line, red line B, to the larger blue line A, that ratio of the length of those two lines is the same as the ratio of both lines combined, so green A plus B, to the larger of the smaller lines, so A. So B to A is the same as A to A plus B. So you can see that this kind of pattern, this additive pattern, can just go on and on and on and on. This golden ratio can also be expressed as a series of numbers, and that's what you see there at the bottom of the screen. And as Donna explained, you'll notice that you take any of those two numbers, and the next number in the series is the sum of those two numbers. 1 plus 1 is 2, 1 plus 2 is 3, 2 plus 3 is 5, 3 plus 5 is 8, etc., etc. And this is this series of numbers here is what we refer to as the Fibonacci series or Fibonacci numbers. And I use this string of numbers to derive all of the pitch material in the Stones. So how I do this? Well, before I started writing any music for this piece, I wanted a set of pitches or some kind of scale that would serve as the basis for the piece. I wanted some kind of logic or some kind of formula that would guide my choices. So to generate these notes, I read each number in the Fibonacci series as a musical interval. Now, Donna talked to you a little bit about intervals. She talked to you about fourths and fifths and how when you invert them, they add up to 9 and that sort of thing. Well, I used each one of these numbers as a musical interval. In other words, the interval being the distance between one note and another. And I treated these Fibonacci numbers as a indicator of how many semitones would be present in each interval. So for example, you can see here on this first line, I've started on the pitch B. And the first Fibonacci number there is 1. So if I move up 1/2 step from B, I end up on the note C. The next Fibonacci number is a 2. So if I move up 2 semitones from the note C, I end up with a D. So I kept moving through the Fibonacci numbers, and I kept moving through these pitches in this fashion. If I start on the D, and I move up 3 semitones, I end up on the note F. Likewise, if I start on F and I move up 5 semitones, I end up on B flat. And you can see on the bottom row there, it generates quite a string of pitches, and you can take this as far as your desire or ability to crunch numbers. Excuse me. I have only shown you here the first, what is that? The first 9 or 10 Fibonacci numbers there at the bottom. But for the purposes of this piece, I went through 20 Fibonacci numbers in order to derive pitches. And as you can imagine, I ended up with quite a string of pitches, only some of which are shown here on this particular graphic. So I ended up with this large collection of pitches. How do I turn them into a scale? Well, I put them through a little bit of a process. I reduced all of the pitches to appear within the same octave. And when you do that, you'll notice that some of the pitches start repeating one another. So in this first collection of pitches I have, again, there were many more pitches in the series than this, but I'm just showing you part of it so that I can show you the process. Here you can see that there is a repetition of the note D. So when I reduced all of these pitches to the same octave, I then eliminated all of the repetitions because I'm looking for a scale. I'm not looking for a melody. I'm not looking for any kind of horizontal melodic structure. I'm not looking for anything like that. I just want a scale that I can use to do as I please with later. So I eliminate these duplicate pitches, and then I simply rearrange them in ascending order with all of the duplicate pitches eliminated, and this is what I end up with at the bottom.
So it starts off diatonic and then becomes chromatic. Right?
Yes, so there are some interesting characteristics to this scale. As Donna mentioned, the first half of the scale from the B up to F is kind of diatonic. I probably shouldn't use the word diatonic, but I should say is that it is a mixture of whole and half steps. So it sounds like a more conventional scale that we're used to. But then the last half, the last 5 notes, interesting, Donna talked quite a bit about 5. Well, the first 5 pitches have that characteristic of being kind of modal. The second 5 pitches are entirely chromatic. They're all half steps. And so that gives the 2 different halves of this particular scale dramatically different qualities. Okay, so
well, can I just say that what I see here too is that you've got a 1-5 going on anyway between the B and the F sharp. So,
well, here's a little interesting something interesting about this scale. If I just leave out a few pitches, if I leave out the F, if I leave out the G sharp, if I leave out the B flat, I end up with this. I don't know if hopefully you'll be able to hear this. This is just my electric piano, but we'll see how it goes. And that's one of the church modes. That's the Phrygian mode. So the first half of this scale is kind of like one of the church modes. But then the last half of the scale is quite chromatic, which gives it quite a different color. All right, moving on from there. So I've got my scale now, and I've used the Fibonacci numbers to generate that scale. I also used Fibonacci numbers to structure some of the phrases in the piece. So looking at this slide here, you'll see a series of red boxes and a series of green boxes. Each series of boxes constitutes one musical phrase. So I'm showing you where the musical phrases are here in the score. And the musical phrases are constructed by a string of chords, and each little group of chords has each little group contains a different number of chords, and the number of chords contained in a group is determined by the Fibonacci series. So if you look at this first red box here, you'll see that there's a bass note and a chord. And so this is a bass note and one chord, and the first Fibonacci number is a 1. The second group is a bass note and 2 chords. Fibonacci number is 2. The very next grouping is a bass note and 3 chords. So, you can see already that I am beginning to construct these phrases out of groups of chords that follow the Fibonacci number sequence. Now, the whole piece of music is comprised of an introduction that does not use Fibonacci numbers for its phrase structure, but then there's the body of the piece, and then a coda or a little conclusion to the piece. The body of the piece is comprised of 4 phrases. Each of those phrases is built out of sets of chords, and the number of chords in each one of those groupings is according to the Fibonacci series. So if we look at the second phrase, the second phrase here leads up to the climax of the piece, which actually occurs fairly early in the piece. And you can see in these green boxes that the first box contains a bass note and 2 chords. The second contains a bass note and 3 chords. And this time, this last box contains a bass note and 5 chords. So you can see how I'm following the Fibonacci series there. After the climax of the piece, actually, maybe before I move on to the climax, I'll just ask Donna if you would play the first phrase, and I will kind of count out so that they can hear the number of chords in each phrase.
Okay. Yep, this is bar 7, yes?
Yeah. So this will be Donna will be starting at the first red box. So there's the first bass note and the first chord. 1, 2, 2 chords in that grouping. 1, 2, 3 chords. And then a kind of cadence. Bass note, 2 chords.
Maybe I should, why don't I count? Because I think there's delay, and I think that it's not. So this is, so like say in that phrase I just played, this is bass, and then 1, 2, bass, 1, 2, 3, bass, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because I was not, I think there was a bit of delay.
Yep.
Yeah.
I hadn't taken
Maybe
that
maybe
into
that's a little
consideration.
clearer. Maybe that's a
Yep.
little clearer.
Yep. It is. Thank you for that, Donna.
Oh, sorry, no worries.
Moving on now, after
Kevin,
the
just wants to be aware,
climax.
we've got about 10 minutes left, so
Yep.
yeah.
After the climax, this pattern continues, except now the chords are descending. And both phrases 3 and 4, I've not shown you phrase 4 here, because I'm hoping by the time we get through this kind of little orientation tutorial kind of thing, you'll be able to hear the number of chords yourself. But both phrases 3 and 4 contain 2 chords followed by 3 chords, followed by 5 chords. So Donna, would you do the same for this third phrase? So this is at the 4/2, minimum equals 64.
Yeah, and again, I'll count. So
yes,
and
please.
It probably won't be precisely in time, but we'll get the idea of the number of chords. So here we go. Sorry. One, 2, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then the next phrase, same idea. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Thank you, Donna.
Yep.
Then we get into the coda and the forces that are driving the phrase structures change. So they're no longer, from that point on, no longer linked in a concrete way to the Fibonacci series. But that gives you a bit of a crash course in how I used something external, in this case, the formula of the ratio, the golden ratio, to generate pitch material for my piece. And so I appreciate being invited here today to talk about this, and thank Donna for her kindness in inviting me. And I hope that this, when Donna plays the whole piece now, you will be able to really follow these phrase structures, and hopefully it will be a bit more of an enriched listening experience. Now, I understand that there is room for some question and answer. So Donna, I will leave that to you as to whether we do that now before you play the piece or after.
I think let's do it after, okay? We'll do
Yep.
it after. And can I just, like, this discussion that you and I had, can I just like briefly mention the C cadence idea? Because just so that what we hear is at the end of the introductory phrase, Kevin comes, shall we say, to rest on these, again, the pitch C, but he starts on the pitch B. And remember how the Bach is the BC, Ruth Crawford is BC, and here we have Kevin March in 2022, the B and the C, but again, he moves the B up to the C to create this sense of kind of stasis, and he does this at various points in the piece as sort of cadencing or coming to rest or coming home places before moving on into a new phrase. And then I mentioned that Diabolus in Musica, the F sharp, the tritone, and he uses the F sharp to start the coda, which then ends up on the B. So then it functions, once again, this 5/1 we were talking about. So we have that, shall we say, dominant functioning pitch, almost like dominant tension. Remember when I was doing in the Bach, a kind of dominant tension in the piece. Before I play this, I want to say a very, very special thank you to Kevin, who is I mean, you've read his biography. This man is a genius. I am very privileged to call him a friend, and even more privileged perhaps to be collaborating with him on this fabulous project with the Fantod Pack, which we've actually been talking about how we're going to get this onto videotape. Hopefully the 28th of February 2023. In any case, here we have the Stones, and he gives as his tempo, or I call it character indication, dark, monolithic. By the way, that was a world premiere performance, everyone.
Thank you, Donna. That was fantastic.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for the piece. Thank you for you. And thanks to everyone. And once again, I just need to point out Sandra Beerza, also in Melbourne, Australia at 6 a.m. Oh, what a champion. So now, if there are questions, oh, I see we have 12 chats. Maybe they're not questions. If there are questions, I think, do we have time, Julie?
Well, Donna, there's a couple of people asking whether you could share a list of the music you played or a link
Yeah, it's
to
on,
where people
it's
can find
actually,
your music.
yeah, it's in the slides. I
And
did,
we can share those.
yeah, I was, oh, are they not in the, oh, wait a minute, did I not? I thought I put it in here. Yeah, the list of pieces should be in here. Repertory for today, slide number 17.
Okay.
Yes. Do you want to put that on screen right now? Can you go to slide number 17?
I have suggested reading this second. 17.
Yeah.
Yes.
Repertory for today. So it shows the Bach, the Crawford, the Ruggles, and Kevin's piece.
So, but we probably, it's easiest if we share this afterwards, but you can already take a picture with your phone if you want from the slide.
Yes, or screenshot, yes.
But thank you, Donna and Kevin. That was absolutely lovely, and we're almost at the end, but I do see a hand up. Stuart, why don't we bring your voice in before we close? Then we have some voices.
Wow, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you up.
Yeah, I tried to write this question down in the chat, but for some reason I'm not able to get it sent to you so that it's visible to you. So I'm just going to ask you verbally. Kevin, you really caught my attention, partly because I'm working on a book called The Making of Meaning. And you used the word meaningful in your description at one point in the composition or in the composing process. And you got my attention right away, because I'm thinking, how could a composer define meaningful in the creation of the composition? I mean, I would have guessed perhaps that it had to do with the relations between the different sounds or different phrases, or maybe the relationship between a given part and the whole, or is there some more substantial sense of what is meaningful in music that I'm missing?
Mm-hmm.
Could you ramble on about that for a while, please?
Yep, I can speak authoritatively about what that means for me. I cannot speak authoritatively on what that might mean for someone else. But before I get into that, do you know the book Emotion and Meaning in Music?
No.
It is I'm not 100% sure if I'm remembering the author, but I think it's Meyer or Mayer. But the title of the book is Emotion and Meaning in Music. And it speaks at length about this very topic, right?
Leonard
so
Meyer.
Meyer,
M-E-Y-E-R.
Leonard Meyer.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So when I speak of meaning in music, I am talking about a couple things. One, I am talking about relationship. So, to speak very, very generally, right, at risk of overgeneralization, the relationships between the different movements of a symphony, for example, if you've ever had the sense when you hear only one movement of a symphony, like that you've only read one chapter of the book, right? That's the kind of relationship that I'm talking about. If you're in a sonata form, and there's the composer in the dominant prolongation at the end of the development section, and you are just ready for the return of that, first theme, and finally you get it. And that is the relationship of one section of that piece to another, right? So I'm talking about the relationship of musical materials one to another. I'm also talking about, and I'd be happy to have longer conversations with you about this stuff at a later point. I'm also talking about the way in which pitch structures, and I'm talking about the pitch structure I use in the Stones, I'm talking about 12-tone music, I'm talking about major and minor scales, diatonic functional music, I'm talking about modal music, talking about pretty much every pitch structure in Western music. The way in which it either creates expectation that something else is going to happen, or it creates a sense of fulfillment that you're done. There's nothing more that's left to happen, right? The genesis, or the very core of functional harmony is based on that system of expectation and fulfillment, right? So, and that creates meaning, right? That creates this journey that you're saying, oh, okay, well, the piece can't quite be over yet because, I feel like something more needs to happen, or I feel like something more is going to happen, right? Or sense of, oh, okay, well, boy, this, have you ever listened to a piece of music and had the feeling that a piece of music that you've never heard before, and had this feeling like it was about to wrap up and come to a close, right? Well, that is kind of a way in which a composer has crafted the piece to create a sense of meaning for you. You have this sense that the piece is fulfilled, it's done, it's going to be over soon. And then, of course, composers play with those expectations, right? They tease you. Is it going to finish? Oh no, it's not quite over yet. We've got, and composers like Wagner and Mahler are experts at that. Are we finished? No, we've just got a little bit. We're going to keep you hanging on just for a little bit longer. And then all of a sudden, 4 hours later, you get the one chord at the end of Tristan.
Yeah. I'm thinking of Tristan and Isolde and Wagner.
Yeah,
just go wave after wave after wave.
Yes.
And Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, another great example of. So you're basically implying then that the meaning is in the quality of engagement evoked in the listener.
I would agree with that statement. Yes.
Okay.
I would agree that that when you listen to a piece of music, you go through this journey that is characterized by expectation and fulfillment and an understanding of the relationship of one thing in the music to another. And, keep in mind that the vast majority of music, of Western classical music that we listen to, pretty much every symphony, pretty much every piano sonata, pretty much every string quartet is all entirely abstract music. It is not programmatic in any way. refer to Beethoven 6 as the Pastoral Symphony. But even that it's abstract music. It's a play of musical ideas. It does not tell a specific narrative. Of course, when you get into opera and ballet and things like that, it does tell a narrative, but and tone poems and that sort of thing. But the vast majority of music from the 18th and 19th centuries is all abstract, and yet it is still possible for a rich tapestry of meaning to be created in that music that is entirely abstract.
Julie, I just want to jump in here because we're over time, and I just want to know.
Sorry.
Do we need? No. I mean,
Wow,
do we need to
I mean,
wrap?
it's a
if
good
we need to-
sign. It's a
If we
sign
need to
of
wrap
there's,
this up, and I also just want to say quickly though that we need to be very mindful of the fact that we are talking about a very specific Western European art music that
Yes.
evolved. And again, I go back to the Gregorian Chant. I took you through that whole thing, and we come to like a piece that was written 5 minutes ago. So we understand that these forces are at work. If we, this is very much it's very much cultural. We go to the Asian Pacific and it's a whole different thing with the way that music evokes the response that it evokes, different response. It is not
Yes.
based upon this sense of expectation that is created through this 5-1 thing tension.
Yes.
That we
It's
talked
culturally
about.
derived. It's
Yeah. And so,
it's a product of culture. It's not, there's nothing innate in
yeah,
any
and
of
so I mean this discussion is really a very, very big one, and certainly could go on and on and on and on. But I think because I know we're over time and everybody's like, certainly the people in Europe are anxious to go off to dinner. I want to thank Kevin again. I want to thank Julie, Eleanor, Maureen, the Pari Center, and all the lovely people that have joined today from around the world. Thank you so much for being part of this session, and look forward to seeing you for Music and Numbers 2 in a couple of weeks. Bye
thank you, Donna.
bye. Arrivederci.